Hello, and thanks for joining us for the discussions that we call I'm Curious About. This is a monthly time for people from across the Greater Milwaukee Synod to get together, learn together, and then ask that vital question, what might the Spirit be nudging us to consider? In this discussion, Pastor Kelly Neiman Anderson, who's a member of our Synod's mission team, interviews Pastor Karen Pahl about a resource that she has found tremendously helpful called the Pivot Ready Cheat Sheet. That's a resource you too could sign up to receive from Carrie Newhoff's website. We'll put the information up here on the screen. It's a lively discussion with Pastor Karen, and we really hope you enjoy it. Now, there are a couple different ways you could think about using this video. You could certainly watch it alone and learn alongside all the people who came, but you could also take this video, it's relatively short, and watch it with a team or with the church council from your congregation. We'll actually put up some discussion questions at the end. Those questions are good for individual discernment if you're watching this video alone, but they'd also be tremendous for group discussion. So there's all sorts of different ways you can use this, and we hope that it helps you to really dig into where God might be leading your congregation. Of course, if you want to join the conversations live, you can just go to milwaukeesynod.org/curious, where you'll find information about upcoming dates and topics, and also a link to register so that you can participate live. You'll get the Zoom link once you do register. Now, the point of these discussions is simple. We all know that the world is changing, and it's changing rapidly. But we also know that if we look at the history of Christianity, this is nothing new. For 2,000 years, the church has been finding new ways to share the love of Christ with the next generation and the next generation. And so we're just standing in that grand tradition of reimagining how we can share the same message in a way that a new group of people can hear it. But hear this, you are not alone as you try to imagine new ways to do this. That's what we're doing together as a synod and together as the people of God. We're staying curious together and asking, where's the Spirit leading us? We hope you enjoy the discussion.
Well, hi, fellow disciples from the Greater Milwaukee Synod. Welcome to I'm Curious About. This is a monthly discussion about mission, curiosity, and following where the Spirit is leading us. My name is Kelly. I am a pastor at Lutheran Church of the Resurrection in Racine. I'm also a member of the Greater Milwaukee Synod's mission table. And today I get to talk with you. I get to talk with all of you, but I also get to talk with the Reverend Karen Pahl, who's also from Lutheran at Church of the Resurrection Racine. I actually get to talk to her every day, but today I get to talk to her with all of you. And we get to talk about thriving in the midst of change. So Pastor Karen, how about you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Oh, hi, I'm Pastor Karen Pahl. It's good to see everybody. I am also blessed to be just recently nominated as the Synod Treasurer. So that's been a fun new thing that I've been involved in the last few months. Matt twisted my arm a little bit. So that's been a fun thing. So, and I was dean before that in the South Conference. So I was excited to have Pastor Allison take that on. So it's been exciting to be part of all different aspects of our Synod. So today I'm excited I serve with Pastor Kelly in the Racine area, and previously was in an interim in Kenosha and then in Waukesha. So I've been here for a little over 8 years now. Believe it or not, time flies and we're having fun. So yeah. So excited to be here to share some stuff today.
I'm glad you're here. So tonight I want to learn a little bit about more what you've been reading and thinking about as we talk about thriving in the midst of change.
Well, I think like many of you, all of us in the midst of the pandemic, I think things have been changing each and every day. And like, I think Pastor Kelly and I both, every council meeting, there was always something changing, and we were pivoting and trying to think of what was happening next. And so today in my presentation, there was a sheet that came up in one of my emails that came up one day from Carrie Newhoff, who is a leader that I follow in podcasts and in emails that I get from him and in blog articles and many things. And this Pivot Ready spreadsheet, which I think they're going to post in the chat for you as a link, is something that I thought was really intriguing to me because, and I'll show a little information. I don't know if I want to bring that up now, but I will share some information as I talk through that. Pastor Kelly, do you want me to bring that up now?
Yeah, now's a great time. We've got a few minutes. The link is in the chat. When you show me this cheat sheet, I was just blown away because I'm the kind of person that really likes sort of the graphics and sort of the bullet points. And I liked the idea of being pivot ready. I didn't know what that meant. So I'm interested to hear more about what you thought about thriving in the midst of change, because so much change has been happening.
Yeah. So the PowerPoint here talks about thriving in the midst of change. And when we were talking about change, when I think about that with his pivot ready spreadsheet, Carey Nieuwhof talks about this in his podcasts and YouTube and various places. The culture is changing faster than ever. And so he talked about that. And when he was talking about that, he was bringing up that culture is changing faster than we know. No one predicted this unpredictable situation or uncertainty that we're in. And he also was really talking about, which means the models that we had prior to this disruption broke, either producing a fraction of the results that we were used to, or they stopped working in the entirety. And so I know that us in our council meetings, we're just having conversations of what's next, what's going to happen next. And then pivoting may be the right answer, but it's much easier said than done. So many organizations struggle to move quickly and intelligently during these uncertain times. So he was talking about, how do we pivot? And one of the things that was interesting in this spreadsheet, or in this pivot sheet, is that he talked about leading through these kinds of changes isn't easy. And he said, in the midst of this, that there are 5 kinds of leaders that surface in the midst of disruption or change. And I found this interesting, that when we were talking about this kind of change, is that he was talking that in the midst of change, leaders take on all different kinds of perspectives. So when we talk about the church, there are pastoral leaders, there are council leaders, there are committee leaders, there are Sunday school teachers that are leaders, there are worship leaders, there are leaders that are sitting in our pews that are just lay leaders, that are the movers and shakers in our congregation. So we have to think about that everyone takes on, it's that priesthood of all believers kind of leadership in our church. We're all leaders in our church. And so when we're dealing with pivoting or changing or things that we just don't quite have a grasp on, we have to think about how people think about change and leading at that point in time. And in disruption and change, we all have different perspectives as leaders. And I thought that was interesting for me as a pastoral leader, and also sitting with my council as leaders, of thinking about how many of us think about change and disruption and all of that. So he laid out these 5 different types of leaders. And so as he did that, he talked about that there are leaders that are deniers. And deniers deny the fact that the change is happening, period. And he says they set up the organization for failure, or deny the truth and don't change at all. And then they also, then there's resistors. They resist and don't deny that the change is happening, but are trying to recreate or revert to the past. And they want to be in the past all the time. And resistors also, it's hard to go back to normal when normal has disappeared. And I think I've heard that a lot right now of where we are. And then as the resigners admit to themselves that change is happening, and they realize that things aren't going to go back to normal. And the resigners also resign, they don't have the energy for what's ahead. So they just resign and they don't have energy. There are adapters, and adapters understand that they are leading through this large scale change. But what's important about people that are adapters, or leaders that are adaptive, is that they're not innovating either. They're just adapting to the change that's happening. And so that's kind of an interesting. And then the last thing he said about adapters change enough to survive or perhaps grow, but never pivot beyond what is necessary to happen right in the current setting or reality. And then innovators see change and revamp. And the innovators are curious and passionate and resilient, agile, and willing to fail. Not a lot of us are. Even myself, I don't know if I want to fail. But, sometimes we have to we do it and then we're like, oh, I guess we'll start over again, and then keep on keeping on and moving forward.
Right.
I don't know about all of you, but how many of you in there are you willing to fail? It's not an it's I mean, I know we want to try to do it, but boy, it's hard to do it sometimes. And we know that we learn from it. So it's important to do. Even teaching our kids how to fail is not an
Oof.
easy thing to do.
Right, right.
So those are some of the things that came up in this article that really helped me understand that we have all different kinds of leaders, and in the midst of change, how all of different kinds of leaders in our congregation, whether they're deniers or reverters or resigners or adapters or innovators, when we're in change and we in some of and we all have different perspectives of how we handle change, then makes us realize as we're trying to lead through this change that we're not all in the same place. And
Right.
that's kind of sometimes the hardest thing. And so what I thought was interesting and that I thought was interesting for me, and I don't know, we're not going to bring up the questions, and maybe I'll just go through this real quick,
Yeah,
is that
no, yeah, that's okay. No, we want to talk about some, it sounds like some questions came up for you, and that's part of our process, right? Is that, we're curious. That's what we talk about every week. So you had some curiosity. So tell us a little bit about what made you curious, right? What were
what
some of your questions, your
well,
curiosities?
some of my questions and curiosities, as I realized that we're all, all of us are leaders in our church, and we all sometimes have different kinds of leadership. Then it made me think about, can we all be innovators? And I said, yes, I think we all can be innovators. And then it also thought, we all can be innovators, even though we're in different places. How do we think about where we are? It's a matter of where we are and what our perspective is. And then how can we work together as leaders and think about where we want to go? And I think that's the key critical, is how do we work as leaders together to think about where we want to go?
Yeah.
And sometimes, depending on where we are in our leader mindset or in our, pivot ready spreadsheet, thinking about what kind of leader are we and where are we in our perspective, we may need to share more information with the where people are in each place, from where we are and where we need to go. And so
Mhm.
sometimes as leaders, depending on where we are, either as pastor leader or council leader or as a committee leader, sometimes we have to spend more time in conversation with certain people in order to share that information with them, and to actually, share where we want to go. So
Yeah.
how is this moving us to innovative thinking? I think it's really having those faithful conversations with one another and sharing honestly about what our direction is going and how are we
Mhm.
setting ourselves
Mhm.
up to thrive for the future. I think it's really having those deep conversations. So that's kind of where I am related to that kind of conversation of
Yeah.
what questions I had is, how are we doing that? I have a little bit to share on that of my hopes about where we go with that. So,
Oh, yeah. I want to hear more about your hopes, because it sounds like you're still asking the questions. Doesn't sound like you have all the answers yet.
well, my hope is related to this is
Yeah.
how are we setting ourselves up for the future to thrive? Is
Uh-huh.
that as we all have different perspectives as leaders and how we are, is that that we try to move towards this agile mindset of leader, or this innovative kind of perspective of how we're going to move forward out of these pivoting situations, out of these challenging times like we are in COVID, that we all, I don't know how many of you are just like we're in your congregation, maybe challenged with volunteerism right now, people returning to your church, different situations about how are we having those conversations of what are we seeing for the future of our church. And so this was a wonderful diagram that he had on this pivot ready spreadsheet, to think about that we all have different leadership perspective and we all have different ways that we bring out conversation. And so he laid out this diagram, and it said sometimes the conversations out of a non-agile leader or a perspective of certain leaders you might hear, we can't make any progress, our methods don't work anymore. But then the other side of that is that as we think about being innovative thinking, moving things forward, our mission is too important here. We have to find new methods to accomplish it. And so, both of these, how do we maybe change the conversation in the group with all different kinds of leaders as being on that hopeful side of where are we seeing us in the future? How are we having that conversation? How are we changing the conversation to that more hope-filled conversation for the future of the church? And so I thought this perspective of an agile leader, an agile church, how are we being more positive, made me think really on a bright side of different involving different people and maybe moving the conversation into that positive, hopeful, moving forward, even in the midst of a challenging situation. So, and I really like that. Don't worry, things will go back to the way they were, as we were talking about. There's a new normal out. We've tried something new already, but what else could we try that might be more effective? So I think
Yeah.
there, so some of these questions I thought were really some very positive moving forward kind of thought processes and things to talk about related to all these different layers of leaders that could
Mhm.
really be some positive motivating and moving forward questions that might really challenge us to think about where we are and where we can move forward to. So
Yeah.
that's what really moved me the most about and really pushed me to really share this information is because I know, at least in our conversations and the conversations that we've had at our church, that
Mhm.
sometimes we get stuck and we don't have those conversations that move us forward. We get stuck in where we are today and we
Yeah.
forget to kind of think about the forward moving questions.
Yeah.
So
So, what do you think God might be nudging us to consider at this moment? I think you've started to touch on some of that, but there might be even more.
well, I think what God is nudging us to do is that how can we make this possible? I think the
Mhm.
question is, how do we make this possible for us as leaders? How do we have the faithful conversations, knowing that we have all different kinds of people in our congregations?
Mm.
We have the leaders that are, in our congregation. We have leaders in our council. We have leaders that are, that are doing our all different kinds of leadership roles, behind the scenes. How do we all have the ability to have a voice together? And so that's the challenge, is how do we bring those voices together to have the faithful conversations, to know that in the midst of change, we all have a voice to be able to do so. But how do we do it knowing that we're all in different places? That there are deniers, there are reverters, there's resigners, there are adapters, there are innovators, and that we all have different perspectives. It's not easy. It's really not. And so how can we do that? I think that's the challenge. I mean, and I think there's hope in all of that, but how do we do that in the right in a way that is positive? And I think we can do it by having these very positive and influential questions that focus us into the future. Because we do, I think the biggest challenges right now is that a lot of our church members, at least that I have experienced, are asking us, where is everybody? But I think we still have a church today that we need to care for and move into the future.
Yeah.
And so we have a church today, and we work with the church that we have today to move forward to the future. And so let's be positive and move with the questions that we have to continue to move forward today and into tomorrow. And then
Sure.
and yes, there are people that we're missing and there are people that we love, and we just need to continue to invite, but we need to continue to think about where we are today to move in tomorrow. And
Yeah.
so I think that's why I love these questions, to think about what are our possibilities for the future. And
Sure.
then so that's what I loved. I also will share a wonderful survey, and Jamie will put that out there if you want to look at. Was interesting that really pointed out what in the last in 2020 they did a survey about what agile churches were, about churches that have been growing in the last 10 years, had a 5% increase in growth, what the key factors are in these churches. And I know not all of us can hit every one of these bullet points as a church, right? But maybe as we have those conversations, like some of those questions I showed, what are some of these things that we may be able to, as congregations coming out of this pandemic and trying to pivot and trying to change and trying to do something to be able to move us forward? Maybe some of these things, we can do. Can we can work on a clear and compelling mission? Can we innovate and be open to change? Can we be active in our local community? Can we try something different for worship? Are we good in incorporating new people into our community? Some of these things were pretty interesting to think about.
Yeah.
A community, so I just wanted to share a few of these things with you. And the survey, they'll put that in the chat, was a really great Faith Communities Today, the 2020 survey, and it had like 15,000 congregations and over 80 different denominations. So it's a pretty breadth of information to share. So
Yeah. So thank you for sharing. There are links in the chat with these resources in print form. Pastor Karen, we had a question from the group about if there's a video about this. Do you know if there's a video about this?
If you go to Carrie Newhoff's, not about the Pivot Ready spreadsheet, but the spreadsheet itself, I know that he has like a 30-minute like Pivot Ready resource that you can also sign up for if you go onto his website. I know I saw that today.
We can look for that during the small group time and try and find that for you by the end. So we've got one last question for you, Pastor Karen. And this gets to the heart of why we do what we do in the church. So in one sentence, why does Jesus matter to you?
Why does Jesus matter to me?
Yeah.
Oh, because he loved the orphans, the widows, the people who nobody cared for. And he called them out and cared for them and made them feel loved and respected and welcomed. And I think that is our call, is to continue to care for those who have unjust situations and call them into the world to say, you matter and you're loved.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing, Pastor Karen. I want to thank Pastor Karen for sharing with us today and let all of you know that a video of this conversation will be available at milwaukeesynod.org/curious. And we will have regular opportunities to dream together. These monthly conversations will continue every fourth Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom. But even though I just said that, next month, the fourth Tuesday is a holiday week. So next month will actually be Tuesday, November 30th on the fifth Tuesday. And next month's topic will be, I'm curious about how to be the church when the church culture has changed. Talking about what it means to be the church in a secular age. I am really excited about this conversation, and there'll be more info about it in the next month. For those of you listening to this discussion on video, you can get connected to the monthly discussions at milwaukeesynod.org/curious or calling the Synod office. So to close, we want to make sure you know that this time is really just meant as a catalyst to help you and the members of your congregation take whatever the next step is in living into your mission. If you've heard something that you and some folks from your congregation want to learn more about, or if you would like someone to help you figure out what the next step might be, please reach out to Matthew Short on our Synod staff, and we can discuss how he or someone from our Synod's mission table might be able to accompany your congregation in those steps. Together, may we continue to follow the Spirit and stay curious about the new ways that God is leading us as a church. We'll see you next month.